Hi, I'm Janelle, and it's that time of year again, time for program plans. I work in the Wisdom Homeschooling office and have had a few mothers calling in, wondering just how to write up a program plan. I'm going to talk about how to create a good plan, but to illustrate this today, I will talk about my fictional family rather than my real one. I homeschool my children and have just finished my plan for Jane, my oldest of 3. Last night, my husband and I got together for our annual planning date to look at our overall vision for our family and to revise our long-term goals for our children. We also took a look at what subjects we would be covering based on those goals and discussed curriculum possibilities and how we would go about teaching the children. I just finished the program plan for Jane, and it wasn't that hard. 1 down and 2 to go. We're a typical homeschooling family. We've been doing it for years. Sometimes we were so busy that we didn't take time for some of the basics, like mapping out where we were going, setting up specific goals, and importantly, developing a way to assess whether or not we had accomplished them. Several years ago, our facilitator encouraged us to begin with a very basic task. Together, write down our vision for our family and look at our long-term goals. Of course, my husband and I had always talked about these things, but for some reason, we had never actually written them down. So we decided to go out for dinner and do just that. We began by writing out our vision statement. This would give our whole family direction, identify who we are. This vision statement is not something the facilitator needs to look at. It's just for us. But this is what we came up with. Then we talked about our 3 children, all so different. First, we talked about Jane. She's in grade 5, loves to read and write stories. Then there's Isaac. Grade 3 is just a concept. He's so different from Jane. Very hands-on, doesn't like to read, loves the outdoors. Attention span is about 5 seconds, unless it's something he can get his hands on, like Lego. Then he can concentrate for hours. Beth, our youngest, is just learning to read. She loves people. When she grows up, she wants to be a famous singer. How do we teach each of them so that we build on their talents, stretch them in ways that don't discourage them, and do all this without frustrating ourselves? It's helpful to remember that we have our own gifts and limitations. So after the vision statement, we looked at long-range goals for our children's education. What do we ultimately want for him or her? Then we looked at what we would like each child to achieve in this coming year. One example is we want Beth to become confident enough in her reading to eagerly pick up and read picture books daily. So we stated this as an outcome. Beth will become sufficiently confident in her reading to eagerly pick up and read picture books daily. Alberta Education has published a list of general outcomes they require us to reference. Wisdom has put these on their website. We decided that Beth's first outcome referenced the government's outcome A, so we wrote that down too. Beth will become sufficiently confident in her reading to eagerly pick up and read picture books daily. The reference, Schedule of Learning Outcomes A, read for information, understanding, and enjoyment. These government outcomes need to be achieved to some degree by the end of high school, so we only need to reference the ones that apply to our desired outcomes for our child this year. Jane, Isaac, Beth, all so different, right? But once we discussed our vision and long-term goals and jotted down notes on each child, it became much easier to lay out a few reasonable outcomes for each, balancing between different subjects and paying careful attention to how much we can reasonably expect. Not too much and not too little. especially with Beth and Isaac. The word subjects could more accurately be replaced with skills. We won't be using a math text with either of them this year. Beth is going to learn units of measurement and basic fractions by helping me bake each week. Isaac will learn to add, subtract, and multiply by helping build the garage. He will also be estimating the age of trees by measuring their circumference and then verifying how close he was once Dad has cut it down. We'll get a couple of cords of firewood out of the deal as well. Maybe we'll get him to estimate the weight of the pieces when he helps load them on the trailer. Oh, and we can get him to identify species of coniferous and deciduous trees as they choose the ones to be cut. I'll have to add that to the outcomes. In fact, with all the things he will learn out in the bush with Dad, I'm sure we will be revising our plan at mid-year to include a great number of outcomes. But let's start simply and manageably. Jane is very inspired to do daily math computations from a textbook, so we'll find a resource to help with that. Different though our kids are, for each we will reference the Alberta Education Learning Outcome. C. Use mathematics to solve problems in business, science, and daily life situations. Bet you didn't know that baking was science, eh? Oh, and so is biology. I think we will reference D and E as well. Most of the resources we chose to list in our plan aren't books at all. We have field trips, music lessons, sports, online courses, working with Dad, playing medieval games, dressing up. Boy, our time as a couple was very well spent. We had written our vision, talked about our long-term goals for our children, and discussed our individual children, where they were gifted, how they learned, and so on. Then came the heart of it for the year ahead. We came up with specific outcomes we planned on achieving with each of them. Then we wrote down the methods we would use to achieve those outcomes and the resources we would use. We had a plan. We didn't want to drop this thing once we had gone so far, and actually had fun doing it. We then took a look at getting it all down in a workable format, and we had one last piece to think about. How do we know whether or not we have been successful? How would we evaluate? When we began to think about evaluation, we were suddenly very glad we had been so specific in the first parts of our plan. The beauty of choosing specific objectives was that they are much easier to evaluate than our general goals. For example, we will evaluate Beth's reading objective by observing whether or not she is picking up picture books to read and enjoying them. By year end, we will evaluate whether or not it is a daily practice. Yes, Alberta Education also wants us to indicate why the evaluation is effective. That's an easy one. For just about everything we do, our method of evaluation is effective because it is specific to the individual child. Although we need accountability with Isaac, we know pen and paper tests won't give an accurate indication of his math skills. We decided to evaluate Isaac's math by observing daily his ability to add and subtract, each week making brief notes in my journal about his progress. Once he is comfortable with adding, we will introduce quick adding with multiplication and evaluate that too. Dad figures the garage is going to take all winter, so by next spring we hope Isaac will be not only confident with basic computations, but pretty good at building too. As I said, last night we had our annual planning date. This morning it was time to write up the plan. Where do I start? I can use my own format or take advantage of the templates on the Wisdom website. The templates on the Wisdom website are really useful. I can take what I've planned out and plug it in to a tidy document that's ready to send to my facilitator. Because I'm following the checklist, as long as my plan contains all the elements needed, I can use any format. So, did we cover everything on the checklist? Okay, all done. I've emailed these to my facilitator, and she'll let me know if I need to tweak anything. The program plan, writing it up, seemed somewhat burdensome, something that I needed to get out of the way. But I found when my husband and I did our homework, we had our date to talk it through, that writing it became easier. I found that when it was finished, my thinking was also sharpened. Rather than being fearful of the process, the finished document helped build my confidence. I connected our vision, the overall education goals, with the specific goals we chose for each of our children. There's an added benefit. This plan is tied into the overall goals, so next year I can just build on this plan and update it. I think I'll even schedule another planning date out with my husband.